If you haven't heard it enough, good morning, and thank you for being here. When I fly Southwest Airlines to go someplace, and I did to come out here, flew from Atlanta to Dallas. They said, we appreciate you choosing Southwest Airlines because we know that you had other choices for your flight, but you chose us, and we appreciate that. Well, with a similar kind of attitude, let me say, I realize you could be somewhere else right now. You could still be in bed right now, but you chose to be here. You could be choosing to do something else, but you chose to be here. And I just want to commend you for that choice. Talking about this kind of stuff, things that some people will look at as a negative topic. For some people, it's a threatening topic. So people shy away from that kind of thing. You didn't do that. You chose to come here, and I appreciate that. Here's what I want you to know. I value you. I value the investment that you've made in this workshop already by your choice to be here. And I want to promise you that my commitment is that you be exposed to some things to think about that you haven't thought about before. And I want you to leave here thinking, boy, this was a good choice. I could have done other things, but this was really a good choice. And that's the commitment I'm making to you. I want you to benefit from this time that we spend together. I'm real thankful for this church letting me come here. We're going to be, this calendar year, 7 times in the state of Texas. We've been all over the place in Texas in this ministry. In 2022, we were in Texas 4 times. In 2023, we were in Texas 4 more times. And now in 2024, we're scheduled to be here 7 times. And we love it here in Texas. I am not like Cheryl Wayne Lahawn, my friend here. He has a cowboy hat and he has boots. I don't have either one.
Poor baby.
I'm going to be spending so much time in Texas. I think before I leave Texas, I need to get me a cowboy hat. I don't care about the boots. That might hurt my back. But I think I might get me a cowboy hat for my big head before I leave Texas. It's great. It's great to be here.
Excuse me for butting in. We have learned that the congregations in Texas are the most prune-loving congregations there are in the brotherhood. So don't let us down when we leave here. Make sure that you get a prune, because I won't tell his joke. Why do we provide them prunes?
We want this workshop. We want to make sure that this workshop is a moving experience for you. And if you need a little help with that, that's why in our bucket tray we always carry individually wrapped prunes. Now there's also chocolate candies there and mints. You're welcome to them as well. I think it's really important that in a world where you're going to lose things, you are going to lose things. I guarantee it. In a broken world, you're going to lose things and you're going to lose people. But don't lose your sense of humor. Proverbs chapter 17 says, a merry heart does good like medicine. We always make it a point to make sure that we are lighthearted occasionally during the course of these workshops. So let me share with you a prayer that I heard somebody pray. Lord, thank you for today. And I've done all right today. I ain't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. And I'm very thankful for that. But Lord, I'm fixing to get up out of bed. And from then on, I'm going to need a lot of help. Be with me, Lord. Amen. Now, I think that this probably happened in some small town in Texas. Now, we've been in Groesbeck, Texas. That's a small town in a different part of Texas. Now, we've also been in some big cities, but I figure this happened in a small town. A little boy was waiting for his mother to come out of the grocery store. Now, this was back when you could leave your kid outside the building whenever you went in, and it was going to be safe. A little boy was waiting for his mother to come out of the grocery store, and as he waited, there was a man that approached him. Said, son, can you help me? I'm new to the area, and I want to know where the post office is. The little boy replied, sure, I can help you with that. you just go straight down a couple of blocks and you turn right. And the man thanked the boy kindly and said, I'm the new preacher in town. I'd like you to come to church on Sunday. I'll show you how to get to heaven. The little boy said, ain't no way I'm coming to your church. You don't even know where the post office is. How could you know where heaven is? Now, I found this story about this real smart widow lady. Joe, her husband, passed away. His will provided for $30,000 for his memorial service. It was an elaborate funeral. As the last guest departed the memorial service, his wife, Helen, turned to her oldest friend, said, well, I'm sure Joe would be pleased. I'm sure you're right, replied Jody, who lowered her voice and leaned in close and said, how much did this really cost? All of it, said Helen. $30,000. Whoa! Jody exclaimed. I mean, it was really nice, but $30,000 for a memorial service? Helen answered, the funeral was $6,500. I donated $500 to the church. The wake, the food, and the drinks were another $500, and the rest went for a memorial stone. Whoa! Jody computed quickly in her head. $22,500 for a memorial stone? How big was it? The widow lady said 2.5 carats. Now that's what I call a smart widow lady. Okay. Yesterday we talked about life, love, and loss. We talked about how we get attached to people and things. And one of the issues that we have in a broken world is we don't get to keep our blessings as long as we'd like. We talked about how we can even get attached to pets. And we even have pet cemeteries because we're real attached sometimes to those pets. We also talked about how that we can lose our health. And when we lose our health, we're going to grieve that because we're going to struggle because our health's really important, isn't it? I had a nurse practitioner who was a brother in the Lord. And I went to him for a regular appointment one day. And I decided when he came in, what I was going to do was I was going to ask him a question. I wasn't even going to greet him. He was going to walk in the door and I was going to ask him a question. So here's what happened that morning. Now he's a nurse practitioner, a male friend of mine. He walks in the door and I said, hey Brent, when do people appreciate their health? What do you think he said? Just like that. When they lose it. Isn't that a shame? We human beings are like that. Sometimes we don't really appreciate our blessings until we lose them. May I make another confession? I didn't appreciate my wife nearly enough. I've come to appreciate her a lot more because she's not with me anymore. That's pretty sad to admit that. And that's why I'm on a mission. For the rest of my life, one of the things I want to do is I want to talk to married people. And I want to remind them, cherish your marriage. Celebrate what I call the love landmarks. Man, guys, don't ever forget the date that you got hitched. Celebrate the love landmarks, but cherish every single day. Because I've never met a person yet who's lost their spouse who said they were married long enough. We were in Prescott, Arkansas. There was this 93-year-old lady, and she was getting around with a walker. I engaged her in conversation after Bible study and after worship that morning. I found out that she was a widow lady. I also found out that she was legally blind. And she lived alone, legally blind and widowed at age 93. I found out about her name. In the course of the conversation, I asked her about her marriage. And I asked about her husband. And then I asked her this question. I said, how long were you married? She said, not long enough. And then she followed that up with 63 years. If it's 30 years, it's not long enough. If it's 40 years, it's not long enough. If it's 63 years, it's not long enough. In this life, in a broken world, we lose blessings that we have become very attached to and that are very special to us. It could be our marriage by divorce. If that happens, we're going to grieve because our marriage is precious. If we lose a son or a daughter to the world, somebody that we've invested our life in and we've really tried to help them to nurture a faith and a relationship with God, but they drift away from the Lord and they embrace the world, that's heartbreaking to a godly parent. And we grieve the loss of our children to the world. If we have an amputation because we're a diabetic or we have some sort of an accident or we come back from war, we're going to grieve the loss of that physical limb. The reality is when we lose something of value, it matters. And we human beings, when we lose something of value, we grieve. And it's okay to be a mess when we suffer loss. We're not a robot. We're not an engine in a car. We're not a laptop. We're not a tree. We're human beings. We have a thinker and we have a feeler, and we're going to be impacted by loss. And grief is how we feel and the journey we're on after we suffer the loss of something really important to us. I want us to look at it from a biblical perspective first. I need Andrew to change this PowerPoint. This is actually the second session today, and I just happened to notice that. Go to the one that mentions heaven's perspective. And what I want to share with you in the next few moments is I want to share with you why we have this ministry called Widowhood Workshop. It has to do with my experience of losing my wife and my daughter's mother. The woman that I married was born about an hour south of Cleveland, Ohio, in Dover, Ohio, in 1952. We met at church. I was not a church-going kid. My dad, when I was growing up, was an unfaithful Christian. I never read the Bible, and I never went to church until I was about 15 years old. Dad decided he was going to come back to the Lord, and boy, he did come back. He changed. He became a new person. When I was a kid, he took me to beer joints. I didn't drink. Well, he always ordered me a 7-Up. I loved the games in the beer joints. They were really cool. But Dad had an alcohol problem. He also smoked a lot. He also cursed. He was a man, he was a grown man, who had left the Lord and left the church. And he lived a life of sin after he had become a Christian. When I was 15 years old, he decided that he was going to come back to the Lord and his family was going to be a church-going family. And so, I went to church for the first time at age 15. Now, frankly, I didn't care about the Lord. I went there because I respected my father and he wanted to go to church. And he wanted his family to go to church. I may not have cared for the Lord, but there was a 15-year-old girl at that church that caught my eye. She had a red, white, and blue outfit, a dress. I still remember the red belt. I became intentionally attached to that girl at age 15. I grew to love the Lord, and I chose to become a Christian. But I was introduced to the person who became my wife at age 15 when I went to church where her and her family were already there. We enjoyed 41 years of being married. We were blessed with 3 daughters. Now, they were raised right because they were all raised in Ohio. They have shirts, and I have one of them too, that says God first, then family, and then the Ohio State Buckeyes. Those 3 children are all faithful Christians. They're married to men who are Christians, and they're active servants in their local churches. One in Gainesville, Florida, one in Villarica, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, and one in Laverne, Tennessee, which is between Nashville and Murfreesboro, off I-24 in Middle Tennessee. My wife and I were blessed with 5 grandchildren. This picture is taken where my wife is buried on a hill in the same city where she was born, in the same city where she graduated from high school. This picture was taken about 18 months after she passed away. I was so happy that she was at least able to be introduced to her 5 grandchildren before she died. Can you imagine having a child, a grandchild of yours, laid in your hospital bed that you are in at your house, and you cannot even raise your arms to hug that child? She had Parkinson's disease. She lost her ability to get up out of the chair by herself. She lost the ability to walk by herself. She lost the ability to go to the bathroom by herself. She lost the ability to take a shower for herself. She lost the ability to talk. She lost the ability to swallow. Parkinson's disease, her form of Parkinson's disease, was a brutal experience. It only lasted 8.5 years, which is a short time for a Parkinson's patient. And then she died Christmas morning of 2013 at 9:40 in the morning. Have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to get up out of bed by yourself? I figure you probably did that this morning without a forklift to get you up out of bed. And then you walked around. I didn't see anybody come in with a walker. Have you ever thanked the Lord for that ability? Have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to hug? Have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to eat? When I brought her home from the hospital on July the 14th of 2013, she had finally consented to have a feeding tube. And I was standing in front of the stove that morning, and something dawned on me. All the years that I had been a Christian, and all the years that we had eaten together, and I had led us in prayer, and we thanked the Lord for our food. Never once did I ever thank the Lord for the ability to eat. Do you know there are people who cannot eat because they cannot swallow? And their nourishment comes through a tube. I think it would be good for us, not just to thank the Lord for our food, but thank the Lord for our ability to eat. Cherish the blessings you have. Remember, if you were here yesterday, you are always more blessed than you're burdened. You may not feel that way, but the reality is you are always more blessed than you're burdened. We need to learn to appreciate our blessings. One of the books back here on the table, that display table that we have here, is called 1,000 Gifts. It's written by a woman who writes about her journey to count 1,000 blessings in her life. I've had women say it was the best book outside the Bible they've ever read. It's one thing to be thankful. It's another thing to be giving thanks. And one way to begin to be more thankful and to give more thanks is to think more specifically about the innumerable blessings that we all have. On Christmas morning of 2013, she passed away. That was a gut-wrenching experience. 41 years was not long enough. After she passed away, I was really struggling big time. And so what I did was I got my laptop out and I started searching for ministries to help people who had lost their spouses. And guess what I found? And I thought, wow, man, have we ever dropped the ball? Especially I thought about the church, the Lord's church. I couldn't find a ministry where the Lord's church was ministering to people who had lost the most precious person in their life. And maybe the most precious blessing they had in their life prior to heaven, and that being the experience of marriage. And so what I did was I convinced my family, and they all bought in. My 3 daughters, my 3 sons-in-law, and my 5 grandchildren. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry is our family's passion project. Every single member of my family has a responsibility in this ministry. And they're the reason that I'm able to be here. Because they deal with a lot of the details, the daily details that I cannot do as I travel all over the country. I think we've been in 22 states now through the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, raising awareness about loss, about its tremendous impact, and how to navigate your life after you've experienced horrific loss in your life. Every year in July, we host a unique event. My family, along with the Laverne, Tennessee Church, hosts a Widowhood retreat. You've heard of youth meetings and youth camps, marriage enrichment seminars, ladies' days. They're all for special groups of people. Why have we not had a Widowhood retreat? If you're married, you can't come. It's illegal. We won't let you come. It's strictly, exclusively for the widowed. Every year in July, this year it's July 19 through 21. This past July, we hosted 158 widowed people from 15 different states. And you know what this retreat is all about? I can put it in one word. It's all about encouragement. You know who needs encouragement? Everybody who's breathing. And you know who really, really needs encouragement? People who have lost their marital mate who's no longer breathing. Because it's even hard to breathe early on after you've lost a beloved spouse. My family is on a mission for the rest of my life. I don't know what's going to happen after I die, but we are all about raising awareness about loss, helping people with their grief, with a special focus on folks who've lost their spouse. Now, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about this experience of the marital state of a person who's lost their spouse by death. Now, I want to share with you some information that I feel confident you don't know this. I don't know why in the world you would seek this kind of information. I never sought this information until I was 61 years old. I had lost my wife, and I was really curious about this subject. We are a minority. Those of us who are widowed, about 6% of the population typically, but 65 years and older, we're 1/3 of the population. 65 years and older, this is in our country, way over 1/3 of the women, 65 years and older, are widowed. 12% of the men. If you drop that number down to 55, almost 1/3 of the women, 55 years and older, are widowed. 9% of the men. Now, the total number is obviously heavily weighted to the female gender. There are 4 to 5 times more widowed females than there are widowed males. There are in the neighborhood of 15 million widowed people in the United States. Hey, I have some interesting information that I want to share with you about where you live. And it's in my Bible. That is in my man purse. I have a friend who calls this my man purse. I did some research about Bowie, Texas. There is a website, censusreporter.org. You may find this interesting. Bowie, Texas, population 5,483. There are a little over 2,000 households in Bowie, Texas, a little over 2,000. 17% of those 2,000 households are what are called female householders. There's not a male living in that house that's an adult. 17% of the over 2,000 households in Bowie, Texas are female householder places of residence. If you were to get all of the females 15 years and older in Bowie, Texas together. Now, I don't know why the U.S. Census Bureau considers a 15-year-old an adult, but they do. If you were to get all the females 16 years and older, 15 years and older in Bowie, Texas together, 16% of them are widowed. 16%. That's a very high percentage. The more common percentage is about 8%, give or take a percent. About 8%. 15 years and older, the females in Bowie, Texas. Those 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old girls, I hope they're not even married. They're not even at risk of being widowed. Imagine if we could kick that up to 20 years and older, how much higher than 16% that number would be. 4% of the males, 15 years and older, are widowed. What that means is there are at least 400 widowed people in Bowie, Texas. I'm not talking about outside, around, close to Bowie, Texas. I'm talking about in Bowie, Texas. Now, this county that you live in, that I understand you pronounce differently than I would. I have a family that they've been close friends for decades in my life. And it's the Montague family. How is it you pronounce this county again?
Montague.
Montague. Okay, Montague County, population 20,000. The median age in this county is 44 years old. That's a tad high, by the way. 20,197 is the population. There are almost 8,000 households in this county. 13% of all the females in this county, 15 years and older, are widowed. 13%. That equates to over 1,000 widowed females in this county. 4% of the males. If you calculate and add all that together, you're talking about at least 1,300, way over 1,000, 1,300 widowed people in this county. Now my question to you is, who is ministering to those over 1,300 people who are widowed? Wouldn't it be great if the Lord's church was known countywide as the church that has a special ministry for the widowed? Imagine the compassionate reputation of a church like that. Over 1 million people every year, sometimes way over 1 million people every year, lose their spouse by death. 6% are under 44 years old. You don't have to be old to be widowed. Just like to be at risk of being divorced, do you know what you have to do? Only one thing. Say, I do. Once you become hitched, you are at risk of experiencing divorce, or you're at risk of being widowed. I never thought about that, but I said I do at age 19. 78% of the widowed are women. The average age of a woman when she's first widowed in our country. Now let me stop at that point. If you were to pick a decade of a person's life where you would think there'd be the most widowed people, do you think it would be in the 70-year-old category, or in the 60-year-old category, or the 90-year-old category? Don't you think there are a lot of those women who would lose their spouses? The average age of a woman when she's first widowed in our country is 57. Now to drive that number down that low, what would you have to have? A lot of women, younger, lose their spouses. Because there are a lot of women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are going to lose their spouse. Now let me explain to you why there are more widowed females than widowed males. There's two reasons for this. Number one, it's the fault of the men, and the second is the fault of the women. Okay, number one, the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man. Now the only reason I can think that would be is us guys take care of you girls so good, you live longer than us. That is the only possible explanation. So that's our fault. The lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man. Number two, this is the fault of the women. Statistically, women have a tendency to marry men who are older than they are. What is wrong with you women? Now, there are exceptions. Is there anybody here who, if they're married now, or if they were married in the past, any women here who were married to men who were younger than they were?
2 months.
2 months, okay, barely.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Only 2.
On the back.
It is. She's figuring. How much?
3.5.
3.5 what?
Years.
Years, okay. I was wondering, it could be months, could be years. But you women typically marry older men. Now, if women are going to live longer than men, because we treat you so good, and then you girls, you choose to marry men who are older than you are, well, that's going to create a whole lot of widowed females, and not nearly as widowed men. Most research is geared toward the females. If you look at a lot of the books written about widowhood, a lot of them are written by women who've lost their spouses, about their loss experience. That's why, after I started studying this subject, I decided to write, because I thought that it was really important, especially in the Lord's church, for us to have some information available to people who are married so that they can read about widowhood, and for the widowed so that they can have a little bit of understanding and encouragement in their life after their loss. And so I wrote 3 books. The first one I wrote was When the End Comes. When I wrote that book, after I wrote that book, I thought, I've got more to say. So I wrote a second book. It's called Before the End Comes. And then after I wrote that book, I thought, I've still got more to say. So I wrote this book, After the End Comes. All 3 of these books are written with 3 people in mind. Number 1, people who have never married but may marry in their future. Number 2, people who are married. And then number 3, people who have lost their spouse, either by divorce or by death. These 3 books are available through Amazon if you are interested. If you're interested in buying one here or a set of them, they are over there on the ministry table. But I have gotten some very good positive response with comments about how helpful, informative, and encouraging those 3 books were. Feel free to take a look at them if you'd like. In the world, there are 245 million widowed females. 115 million of them live in abject poverty. One of the most heart-crushing things I've ever read in my life is the National Geographic magazine, February of 2017. It has in it a story about widowed females in India. If you think you have it hard as a widowed person in this country, or you really feel for somebody that you love who's struggling with life after the loss of their spouse, and you think their life is hard, it is incredible to read about how widowed females in India are treated. I had a hard time believing that human beings could be treated like widowed females in India. I think it's really important for us to educate our missionaries who are in different countries, as well as local preachers and local elders and shepherds in the Lord's church and deacons in the Lord's church in our country about what widowhood is like, so that we can minister effectively to people who are living a challenging life. Now, I'm going to ask you to think out loud together with me. Here's 3 different ways that God describes himself relative to the widowed. A defender, a reliever, and protector of the widowed. Now, I want to ask you, how does he do that? There's more than one answer. Give me a suggestion. If God's a defender, a reliever, and a protector of the widowed, how does he do that?
Community.
Okay. How about the people he created, who exist in his image, who live in his likeness? There's a psalm, you might go on YouTube and search this, People Need People. It's a powerful lyric, and it certainly is a great message. People need people. God did not create us to be living like hermits. We live in a world with other people. As a matter of fact, when we're born into this world, we're born into a family. Or maybe later in life, we're adopted into a family. Because God knew people need people. Some of God's best work is done through the people that he blesses us with in our lives. Do you know who were the best help and the most effective encouragement to me when I was widowed? Other people I knew who had lost their spouses. And I thought about them and I thought, man, if Marlene McCoy can do this, I can do it. If Frank can do this, after he lost his wife Louise, I know I can do this too. And I could go on and mention people. And I'll tell you, some of the most inspiring and encouraging and helpful people have been young women who have lost their spouses way too early. I wish I could buy a bus, and I'd give you each a paintbrush, and we could paint it up like the Partridge Family. For some of you who are younger, you might have to Google that picture. Partridge Family bus. I'd love to take you around and visit some of the people that I met. How about if we went over to Middle Tennessee? I could introduce you to this young lady named Emily. She's a Christian. She was 34 years old. She was laying in bed one morning, and her 36-year-old husband was having a heart attack. She dragged him off the bed, got him on a hard surface on the floor, started giving him CPR, called 911 and had him picked up. A few days later, he died. She's 34 years old. She is an amazing young woman. To this day, I can hear it in my mind right now. The beat, beep, beep. Her husband, Josh, was an organ donor after it was obvious that he was not going to be able to make it. Consistent with his wishes, he was wheeled from his room down through a hall in the hospital, lined with doctors and nurses, reverently honoring his choice to be a donor. And she had this video posted on Facebook. Beep, beep, beep. As if they were saluting him as he was being wheeled down the hall. She was 34 years old. She's about 5 or 6 years now past that mark in her life. Boy, has she ever struggled. But she's learned to survive. And her daughter, who was just about a first grader at the time, together, they're making a new life for themselves. If we got back on that Partridge family bus, we could go over to West Tennessee, and I could introduce you to Cynthia. Cynthia and her husband, 29 years old. They were big cotton farmers in West Tennessee. You think you got cotton? They got cotton too in West Tennessee. Cynthia's husband went out to do some welding out in the barn. And he was welding on this truck that had a tank that was 75% full of diesel fuel, and it had 25% fumes in it. And he cranked up the welder, and what he didn't know, there was a pinhole leak in the tank. When he cranked up that welder, it blew up. It not only blew the building up, it blew his body out of the building. She ran and got a bunch of comforters, real wet, soaking wet, threw them out on his body. He was life-flighted in Memphis, Tennessee, and a couple of days later, he died. She's 29 years old, has 3 kids at this point in time, and you know her field in October is pretty white. You talk about loss and stress. Cynthia had that. I could take you to Groesbeck, Texas, and I could introduce you to Shauna. She has 2 beautiful daughters, Audrey and Katie. She lost Brian. He died of cancer. I try to keep up with her. Occasionally we text. Sometimes we talk on the phone. Why in the world would she lose her husband in her early 40s and be alone with her 2 daughters? I could go on and on and on with stories like that. You don't have to be old to be widowed. All you have to do is be married. But there's a God in heaven who loves you, who providentially provides for you in your life people. And we need to make sure that we are open to the help of God through the people in our lives. You know what one of our problems is? Especially some of us older people. Now, Cheryl Wayne is older than dirt. I simply refer to myself as an old geezer. Okay? Now, when you're our age, you're probably having been affected by the raising of parents who encouraged you to be independent. But do you know we can be independent to a fault? I don't need no help. I can do it myself. You know, sometimes we can be that way. You know, when we're that way, do you know what we've done? We've deprived others of the blessing of loving others. Whenever you've done something to help people in need, how does that make you feel? Tell me. Give me a word. Good. Makes you feel great. It makes you feel wonderful. Now, when we stop somebody from helping us, we've deprived them of that good feeling. I had a good feeling after I was visiting Marlene. Marlene and Addo was her husband's name. They had a good life together, but they didn't get to keep that blessing as long as she would have liked, and he died. Well, I'd left Hartville, Ohio, but when I go back up there in Northeast Ohio, I always make it a point of visiting with people that I know who are widowed. I was visiting with Marlene one day, and we had a good visit. Toward the end of the visit, I found out that she had a light that wasn't coming on when she flipped the switch. And I said, Marlene, before I leave, I want to check that light of yours. She said, oh, no, don't worry about it, Dean. See that independent spirit? I said, no. Marlene, I want to check on that light before I leave. She said, no, don't worry about it. I said, Marlene, if you don't let me look at this light, I am going to move in with you. She said, there's the stool right there. I got up there, and you know what that light needed? A new bulb. She had no business doing that. But see, she had that independent streak. We need to realize that sometimes God's defense of us, God's relief of us, God's protection for us often comes through the people that He's blessed us with in our lives. We need to know about people in need. We need to find out what they need, and then we need to try to provide for their needs. Do you know what a widowed person needs? After our break, later on, we're going to talk about what it's like to be widowed. You're going to find out about some of the needs. Now, in the Bible, it says the wicked don't care about the widowed. As a matter of fact, they would even slay the widowed. And remember that story of Job that we looked at yesterday? He was accused of sending widows away empty. It's interesting that his response to that in chapter 29 is, I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. He was accused of something that he wasn't guilty of. He had a caring heart. He ministered to the widowed. But he was accused of not doing that. And his friends were suggesting the reason why he was suffering real bad is he had neglected people who were in need. And Job said, no, I made the heart of the widowed sing for joy. God wants us to minister to people who are struggling with unique life circumstances. Now, even in the Old Testament, God had that kind of instruction given to his people. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 24, I'm going to read a few verses for you. If you happen to have a Bible, you might even want to turn to that place. But in Deuteronomy chapter 24, I want you to remember where the Israelites are. They're fixing to cross the Jordan River, and they're going to go into the land of Canaan, and they're going to blow the doors off of those barbaric heathen people who lived there, because this was the promised land for the people of God. Now, if I was going to send an email to Moses or to Joshua, I would have sent an email about, here's how, after you cross the Jordan River, here's how you split up and divide yourselves. Here is the kind of weapons that you need to have. And here is the policies and procedures, the rules of engagement for battle. Because we're going to wipe these people off of this precious land. But God didn't do that. God sent a different kind of message to his people. Let me read to you. Deuteronomy 24, starting with verse 17. He doesn't say a thing about war. You shall not pervert justice to the stranger, the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. Now there are three life circumstances there mentioned: stranger, fatherless, widowed. What is the thread that connects all of those together? What do they share in common? Stranger, fatherless, widow. Helpless. They're helpless. They're in need. They're in a uniquely difficult life circumstance. Various specific factors, but they need help. He says, don't pervert justice to these people. He says, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheep in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. Twice it said, you shall remember when you were in Egypt. Why did God bring up Egypt and the experience of the Israelites in Egypt? Talking to them about helping people in need. Why did he bring that up? What was their life like in Egypt? Do you remember? They were slaves. They were living a brutal, terrible kind of a life. They were in abject poverty, and they were under the heavy yoke of slavery. They cried out to God. God heard their cry. God has a compassionate heart. So he not only heard their cry, was aware of what was going on, but he actually, by his great power, he released them from that Egyptian bondage. See, God knows what's going on. He cares about what we're experiencing, and he can help us to navigate the very difficult times of our life. Now, in the Bible, occasionally he did that by miracles. but he today does it by providence. Often through the people, again, that he blesses us with in our lives. Look out for people who are in uniquely difficult life circumstances. People who have gone through the agony of divorce and lost their marriage that way. People who have lost their spouse by death. People who have been struggling with their marriage. And you find out about their struggle. And they need help and encouragement and direction. Maybe you can help them avoid the terrible experience of divorce. Look out for people who have been diagnosed with a disease, who are struggling with an illness. Find ways that you can be of help to those people. What's really sad is the Israelites did not listen. And in Isaiah chapter 1, we don't have the time to look at it, but in Isaiah chapter 1, he sends Isaiah the prophet to them and says, look, you're observing the Sabbath, you are giving your tithes, you're observing the festivals and the feast days, but you're not acceptable to me. Your passion has become these rituals, and you're not caring for people. And he challenges them again, repent, plead for the widowed. He refers also to the fatherless, and he challenges them, care with a compassionate heart for people who have specific needs. See, they were told to do that, but they didn't listen. How many times have we heard a sermon about compassion, about caring for other people, and yet didn't implement a compassionate lifestyle to become our life? I fear we've done that way too often. I participated in the neglect of widowed people for decades in my life. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I didn't know what they were going through. I told you about my daughter's experience of being married at 22. Her husband deserted her at 29, at age 29. I wished I would have known about the powerful impact of divorce in a person's life. I would have been a better father. I didn't understand, nor did I appreciate, what a terrible time she was going through in her life. God wants us to be like him, to have a compassionate heart and feel compelled, moved by that compassion to help other people. In Jesus' day, the religious leaders even went so far as taking advantage of the widow. I don't know what it means to devour widows' houses. I just know that ain't good. Sounds terrible. Instead of compassionately helping, taking advantage of them. In Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, there's a passage in the Bible about the neglect of the widow. I want you to think about this particular section of Scripture. Now, if you study the Bible much, you know that in Acts chapter 2, James D. Bales called that the hub of the Bible. I think he has a good point. Everything in the Bible is kind of leading up to, from Genesis chapter 1, is leading up to this Acts chapter 2 time. Jesus has died on the cross. He's been resurrected. This is the day of Pentecost, after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The gospel is preached, and thousands of people become Christians. You know, repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. Acts 2 and verse 38. About 3,000 people became Christians. Now, after that, in chapter 3, 4, and 5, you read about the disciples' number being added to. You read about the multiplying of the disciples. Brother Wayne Jackson, in his commentary on the book of Acts, says, when you get to Acts chapter 6, you may be talking about a church of 20,000 people. I heard this church on Sunday morning might be 140 something. Imagine being a part of a church of 20,000. Do you know what you have when you have 20,000 people together in a group? You've got a mass of a mess. Because you know what? We are all a mess. For different reasons. To different degrees. We're human beings in a broken world. And man, can we ever be a mess. Because the things we experience in life can have a powerful impact in our life. We have a thinker and a feeler, remember. And that thinker and feeler, they're not always on the same page. And we can be really internally conflicted and really struggle in our life because we cannot believe what dysfunction there is in our life and in our relationships. So you've got thousands of people who have come from all over the inhabited world in Acts chapter 2. And they end up staying way longer than they had anticipated. This wasn't a typical day of Pentecost. Have you ever taken a trip and you end up getting stuck there way longer than you thought? Maybe you had a problem with the car. Maybe you got sick. And you end up staying a longer time than you planned on. What do you need? You need a lot of stuff. Because you didn't prepare for a long stay. These people were staying there, 20,000 people, they were staying there a lot longer than they had anticipated. Can you imagine how many ministry needs there would have been? As these people who were homers in Jerusalem, they have all these people, this influx of people, imagine trying to take care of their needs. Now there's nothing mentioned about any of that kind of neglect of ministry until you get to Acts chapter 6. And the ministry neglect has to do with the widow. Why did he not mention about the difficulty of providing food for all those people? Where did they get all that extra toothpaste they needed? Or deodorant? And where did they live? Where did they stay? How did they protect themselves from the hot sun or the cold nights? None of that is mentioned. The first ministry weakness in the Lord's church mentioned in the Bible is the neglect of the widow. Acts chapter 6 verse 1. In those days when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. They neglected the widow. That's the first ministry weakness in the Lord's church. Now you're probably very familiar with this passage. I'm going to take you back to English class. Now, for some of you, that was probably a nightmare, but I want you to remember, imagine you're in English, okay? Now they call it language arts. I have no idea why they changed the name of it. Remember nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Some of you look so old that you did diagramming of sentences. Okay, welcome to the club. I enjoyed that. That was kind of fun. Okay, now, this is a sentence. I want you to look at this sentence. Now, what I want you to do is tell me what is the subject of the sentence. Now, no modifiers, no adjective, no adverb. We want just the subject of the sentence. What is it? Now, get yourself an A. What is it? What's the subject of the sentence?
Pure and undefiled religion.
Religion.
There's only one word. Religion. The English word religion comes from a Latin word religare, which means to bind back. It has to do with man being bound back to God. You know, we sin, that separates us from God. Through Jesus Christ, we can be reconciled, or made friends again, or we can be in a right religion and be reunited with Him, connected, bound together, back with Him. Religion. That's the subject of the sentence. Now, what kind of religion? See, there are modifiers. What kind of religion? Pure and undefiled. Now, if there's pure and undefiled religion, what does that imply? There is impure and defiled religion. Now, I've got news for our culture. This is politically incorrect, but I will shout this till the day I die. Not all religion is acceptable to God. Exclamation mark. That's true. The previous verse to verse 27 in this chapter, sometime look at that verse. It talks about vain religion. Useless religion. There is religion that's not acceptable to God. Jesus did not come into the world to bring religion. Religion was already here. What he came was to teach us about pure and undefiled religion. Now there are three verbs in this sentence. What are the three verbs? Is. What's the next one? Visit. I don't know. I'm thinking you all need a C. Maybe a D. Okay. Is, visit. What's the third verb? Keep. Okay. Now, this is a sentence about pure and undefiled religion. In whose opinion, by the way? God's. Before God and the Father. What is it? It's to visit the orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Right religion is about two things: passion for God and compassion for people. That's it. That's always been right religion in the sight of God. Do you know what Israel's main problem was? The main problem with the Jewish people in the Old Testament was the fact that they had passion for their rituals instead of passion for God. Their rituals became more important than the God who gave them the rituals. We need to have passion for God and compassion for people. When we have passion for God, we're going to commit ourselves to keeping ourselves unspotted from the world. We live in the world, but we are not of the world. 1 John 5, verse 19, the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. We live in a broken world, a messed up world. There is sin and temptation everywhere. And don't be naive. Yes, there's a God in heaven at work in our world, but there's also a devil who is a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour. We are living in a wartime. You don't get to choose whether or not you're in the war, because the spiritual war is not just around you, it's in you. We all have a struggle inside of us. There's right and there's wrong. There's righteousness and unrighteousness. And the devil tempts us to choose the wrong thing. God encourages us and pleads with us through his book. Choose him. Choose holiness. Choose righteousness. This passage, this word keep, is actually in the Greek New Testament in the present tense, which means keep on keeping yourselves unspotted from the world. You know how you do that? By having a passion for a holy God. That's how you do it. In Isaiah chapter 6, there's a neat experience that Isaiah writes about when he got to see the Lord on his throne. I wonder what the Lord looked like. I have no idea. But he was blown away by that experience. And he heard these three words: holy, holy, holy. I'll tell you, that first part of Isaiah chapter 6 is just blow me away stuff. If you want to get ready for worship, I suggest you sit there in the pew when you come in, just before the first song is sung. Take a look at that passage. We are worshiping a holy God. That's why we want to keep ourselves unspotted from the evil in the world. But there's also compassion for people. Passion for God, compassion for people. Now, visit, this word is from a Greek word that if you were to see it as a Greek word, it looks like this. Now, what it means is, it's the idea of overseeing or inspecting a situation for the purpose of dealing with the needs. That's what the word visit is about in the Bible. You know, in Matthew chapter 25, when Jesus talks about in regard to when the Son of Man comes, and there's a judgment scene pictured in Matthew 25, the word visit is there also. I was in prison, and you visited me. Compassion for other people. Well, this word is a unique word that indicates we're looking for and trying to find out what the needs of a person are, and then we seek to meet those needs. That's what we need to do relative to two categories of people. What two categories of people are mentioned in this passage that we need to visit? Who are the first people? The orphans, and then who are the next people? Okay, now, do you have children's homes in Texas? Okay. Do you know they used to be called orphans' homes? If you're old enough to remember this, back in the 50s and 60s especially, there was a real struggle in the Lord's church about how children's homes should be funded. And there was a little stress about that. No, there was a lot of stress about that subject. Now, today we don't call them orphans' homes, we call them children's homes. You know that Partridge Family bus? I'd like to take you up to Valparaiso, Indiana. I'd like you to visit at the campus of Schultz Lewis Children's Home. And then after we visit there, we could drive south a little bit to the Cincinnati, Ohio area, and we could visit at Potter Children's Home. And then we could go over to Louisville, Kentucky, and down I-65, and we could go to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and we could visit at Potter Children's Home. And then we could drive south on I-65 into the state of Tennessee, and we could visit Tennessee Children's Home. They have a West Campus, a Middle Tennessee campus, and an East Tennessee campus. And then we could drive down to the Huntsville, Alabama area, where there's the North Alabama Children's Homes. There are children's homes all over the country because we want to visit children who are at risk. Do you know the vast majority of kids that we're serving in those homes are not orphaned children? They're children who are having issues. Some of them need professional counseling. They need life coaching. Some of them are struggling with issues that have to do even maybe with mental illness. They may be bipolar. They may be clinically depressed. They come from, a lot of times, dysfunctional families. And what we're doing is we're taking those kids into these homes and we're serving them. Let me give you an example. I'm going to read you a story about a boy who is being cared for at Tennessee Children's Home. James had dreams. He had nightmares. His young life consisted of horrific physical and mental abuse. Even as a baby, James' dad would get drunk and beat him unconscious. His mom was usually too high on drugs to protect James or herself. His parents divorced, but James' nightmares continued. Needing her fix on drugs, his mother had several men in and out of her life. At the age of 4, James was sexually abused by one of these men, desperately wanting the man to stop hurting him. James stopped taking baths and washing in hopes that he would be too foul to be around. When the state of Tennessee finally removed James from his home at 5 years of age, he was malnourished, he lacked social skills, and even basic verbal skills. He was scared physically and mentally from years of abuse. While things improved slightly, James was moved from foster home to foster home, providing no sense of stability or security in his life. It was impossible for him to trust or attach himself to anyone. Then at age 13, James came to the Tennessee Children's Home. Those are the kind of kids that we're helping in our children's homes all over the country. And even in some countries other than ours where we have foreign missionary works. We are helping hurting children because they have needs. Right religion in the sight of God is having an unparalleled passion for God and a deep, moving compassion for people in challenging life circumstances. Now, there's a second object of the same verb. What is the second object of the same verb? The widow. What have we done in our local cultures? What have we done in our modern culture? What have we done in the Lord's church that comes anywhere near the care and concern that we have displayed in ministering to children at risk? Doesn't compare, does it? After my wife passed away, I searched for ministries. Anywhere and everywhere. Ministries to help people who were struggling with their life after the loss of their spouse. And I found little to nothing. That's what caused me to think about the need of helping hurting people who had suffered all kinds of losses in their life, but do it with a special emphasis on the loss of a spouse. Now, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, the Bible says the first line of ministry is for the family. To jump in and help their widowed parents and grandparents. Let me read to you this passage. 1 Timothy chapter 5, starting in verse 3. Honor widows who are really widows. Now that's kind of insulting. You can be a widow, but not really a widow? Now, let me read to you a little bit further. Honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, see, there's a distinction being made. There are widowed people who don't have children or grandchildren. There are widowed people who have children and grandchildren. two classifications of widowed folks. Now, it says, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. In verse 16 of that same chapter, this is the longest passage I know of in the Bible about the widowed. Verse 16, if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that they may relieve those who are really widows. W.E. Vine, in his expository dictionary of New Testament words, says, it seems like that in the first century church, that there appeared to be families who were kind of shoving their responsibility to care for their widowed parent or grandparent off on the church. And God is using Paul to say, no, 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 that's not the way we roll. We're Christians. We care for our family. But evidently in the first century, they were not doing that. Now, in verse 8 of this chapter, right smack dab in the middle of this passage, I'm going to read you this verse. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those in his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now I want you to stop and think about the context of that statement. But if any does not provide for his own what? The verses previous to that verse and the verses after that verse are talking about the widowed. If we don't provide for our widowed parent or grandparent in regard to their needs, we have denied the faith and we're worse than an unbeliever. That's the context of 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. But how can a child or a grandchild provide for the things that their widowed parent or grandparent has if they don't know what their parent or grandparent is going through? I did not do the best job of caring for my mother after my dad died. Before my dad died, I promised him if something happened, that he passed away, I'd make sure mom was taken care of. So dad up and died on me. Now I have 3 brothers. I'm the second of 4 boys. And when he died, I lived about an hour away. And so if she needed help with the checkbook, if she needed somebody to be with her to the doctor, and of course she needed somebody to help around the house, I tried to be there. She had the best looking lawn on her yard. Now, I am borderline OCD and a recovering control freak. I was proud of the fact that my mother had the best looking lawn on the street. Now, do you know what she needed more than any of that, and I didn't realize it? She needed me. You know when I realized that? When my wife died. That's when I realized that. Yesterday, remember, I said life in 3 words is what? People, relationships, and experiences. That's life. People, relationships, and experiences. That's what life's all about. It's not about your age. You know, it's not about the condition of your physical body, you know, your health. It's not about how much money you have in the bank. It's not about where you live. Life is about people, relationships, and experiences. My mother, when she was widowed, more than anything, needed me. And I didn't realize that. I wish I could have a mulligan. But Mom ain't coming back. And I live with that regret. I'll close this session by telling you a story. My mother had an orthopedic surgery. And she had to go to a place that was a rehab facility. And so we're sitting in her private room, just me and her. Now I remember told you I'm the second of 4 boys. The thing I'm most proud about in regard to my mother is she never spent a day in a mental institution after trying to raise 4 boys. I'm the second of 4. It's only me and her. We're sitting in her room. Now, I'm going to let you experience a moment of silence, and then I'm going to tell you what came out of her mouth. That just blew me away. I wish I had a daughter. My internal reaction was, Mom, what am I, chopped liver? I'm here. I mean, come on, Mom. Now, thankfully, I did not say that. I was really blown away by that statement. Now, there are times, and there are a few times in my life, that I'm kind of just gifted with the perfect thing to say. I don't know why it never happens on Sunday morning. Andrew, you can probably relate to this. Yeah, okay. So I'm sitting there, and what am I supposed to say? I wish I had a daughter. So, I exercise self-control and I don't say anything. Now I'm going to give you a moment of silence and I'm going to tell you what I said to her. Mom, I wish you would have had a daughter too. Yes! Man, that was perfect! I'm so proud of myself. Boy, and I said that sincerely. For years in my life, I felt like I was cheated. I would have traded those 3 brothers for one girl in a flash. We didn't always get along very well, us 4 guys. You know, you women, be proud of the fact that you are gifted by God to be special caregivers. You get a bunch of women together, and if we could secretly, us guys, we need to do this. We need to trick some women sometime. We need to install some video equipment that they can't see and get a bunch of women together in a room and tape the experience. I can guarantee you I know what they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about people, relationships, and experiences. You get guys together and you know what is going to be talked about? Hunting, fishing, sports, cars, jobs. But you women, you know what's important. You are uniquely gifted by God to be great caregivers. Now, us men can be good at caregiving, but we really have to work at it and realize that we have got a job to do. We need to learn to be good caregivers. The first thing that hurting people need is people. No matter why they are hurting, the first thing that hurting people need is people. And we need to be those people. And if we have unparalleled passion for God and compassion for people, we will be there. Speak little. Be present always. We get ourselves into trouble when we talk to people who are hurting as if we have the answers. And we don't. We need to humbly be in their presence with a caring heart and prove to them by our presence we care about them. When we do that, we are introducing them to Jesus, because that's how Jesus lived. We're going to take a break for about 5 minutes. Please feel free to get up, stretch, get you some water, get you some donuts.
Hey, good job, Dean.
Thank you, sir. Hey, Gerald Wayne, we need to get him on our team.